Good day all. This is the narrated PowerPoint for Chapter 11, Power and Political Behavior. So we start out by talking about what power is, and in a nutshell, it boils down to one's ability to influence another person. So being able to, okay, in Spanish the verb for that is poder. It's also the same word used for the noun power. So to be able to influence another person. We do this by means of direct influence, where we're trying to affect the thoughts, the behavior, the feelings of another person, and also through authority. This is what you're given as it's a form of legitimate power. Within an organization, it gives you the right, in quotes, to influence another person. The zone of indifference, this is defined by your text as the range in which attempts to influence a person will be perceived as legitimate and acted on without a great deal of thought. So, for example, you're at work and you listen to your boss when he or she explains to you how a particular process needs to be done, or explains to you when you need to be present, or which tasks you're going to be taking on. Generally speaking, everything that person is trying to persuade us to do will fall within what we perceive to be that person's zone of indifference, where we think, yeah, no problem, because you're legitimately my boss, you have every right to tell me to do these things. There are interpersonal forms of power that you need to become familiar with. The first one is reward power. Now again, this is all a function of sort of your formal, what you're able to do. So this is based, it says, on an agent's, in other words, an individual's ability to control rewards that a target wants. So when you're in a supervisory position, you may have the power to reward the folks who report to you. Similarly, the flip side is coercive power. This is basically your ability to punish a person. And then there's what's called legitimate power. This is the authority that's vested in your job description based upon your position in the chain of command and everyone's agreement. You're the boss, therefore you can tell people to do X, Y, and Z. Now, these three together, reward, coercive, and legitimate power, all comprise what's called position power. So these are things that go with a particular position. They're not yours, as in you personally own these sources of power, but rather they belong to whomever happens to be in a given supervisory position. Then there are interpersonal forms of power that are actually personal. They're yours. You own them. The first is referent power, and this is based on the extent to which other people are attracted to you, want to be like you, want to make you happy, etc. And expert power, which is all about, well, what do you know that nobody else knows? What do you know that other people need to know? This is the kind of power that has the strongest relationship with performance. So when you have this kind of power, it enables you to perform at a higher level and satisfaction. When you have this kind of power, you are more satisfied. Likewise, your employees will perform better and be more satisfied. This kind of power is what helps employees internalize what they observe and learn from managers. These are, when you think your manager really knows his or her stuff. Intergroup sources of power, these are really important as you think about the political side of organizations. So one source is the control of critical resources and strategic contingencies. Basically, who within the organization is in control of stuff, could be information, could be money, could be staffing, that other people need in order to do what they're trying to do. So for example, typically the finance hub of the organization will be in control of critical resources and strategic contingencies because they're the ones who can say yes or no to a budget. The factors that give a group control over a strategic contingency include, number one, the ability to cope with uncertainty. Number two, a high degree of centrality, meaning everybody has to come to this particular part of the organization. And then non-substitutability, meaning There isn't anybody else in the organization that can do this. So typically it's only the finance department that can weigh in on the resources that will be available to you. It's rarely, some other unit of the organization. Now, power corrupts, or it can. So how can we go about using power ethically? And by the way, I want to assure you, you want to be a powerful person. You want to be in a position where you can affect other people, where you can influence what they're trying to do. You want also, by the way, to work for a powerful manager, because that's a person who can get you the resources that you need. That's a person who knows what he or she is doing. That's a person who can reward you. That's a person who is well connected. I could go on, but you get the idea. Now, we also have to give careful thought to how do we use power ethically. So with reward power, we want to make sure that we're actually verifying that people are doing what we want to reward them for. We want to make sure that we're offering rewards that people really want. We want to make sure that we're offering rewards that are credible, that there's a high likelihood that the reward will actually be available if a person meets the performance goal. I want you to think back to expectancy theory with that. Remember, instrumentality is that connection between performance and reward. People have to believe that the reward will actually be forthcoming. With coercive power, we need to make sure people know what the rules are and what the consequences of violating the rules are, to explain to people why the rules exist, to do our best to warn people before we step forward to punish folks, at least to the extent that that might be possible, to make sure that whatever punishment is administered actually makes sense given whatever the rule broken or the infraction was. And finally, never punish people in public, always in private. Shaming a person, humiliating a person, that's no way to move forward in a relationship. With legitimate power, we want to make sure that as a manager, as a leader, hey, you need to be cordial and polite. Be nice to people, for heaven's sakes. It's not all that hard to do this, at least with most people. But the real test of your character is, can you be nice even to the people that you don't like? And you will work with people you don't like. You will have people who report to you. You don't like them. But guess what? Again, the test of your character is, can you still be kind to them? Can you be very clear and make sure that people understand what you want? Can you make sure that any request you make is actually appropriate? Can you be adult about this and make sure you're explaining why you're asking for whatever you're asking? Be aware of, sensitive to, try to take into account whatever your direct report's concerns might be. With referent power, we want to make sure that we're treating people fairly. We want to make sure that we're thinking about their interests, not just the organization's interests. You know, this notion that everyone should subjugate their individual interests to those of the organization, that can only go so far. We mustn't treat people as though they're automatons, as though they're robots, as though they haven't feelings and emotions. Remember, we know from earlier discussion about emotions that in fact the best kind of decision making is made when we also take into account our emotions, not when we try to separate those. Try to be a good role model. You know, behave the way that you want other people to behave around you. Finally is expert power. You need to maintain your credibility. This means you got to stay up on whatever it is that you're supposedly an expert in. Don't be afraid to continuously seek out training to try and constantly improve what you know. No matter how smart you are in any topic or any area, any skill area, there's always more to learn. So stay on top of that. Recognize other people's concerns and do your best to avoid threatening people's self-esteem. In order for something, power-related behavior to be considered ethical, you want to think about different ethical theories. One of those is utilitarianism. Basically, remember again, this is about making sure that the majority of people are served. By the way, don't forget, we don't want to punish the minority. We also need to take into account the minority position. We should also consider individual rights. What are individuals' rights? What are their rights to privacy, for example, within the organization? And then finally, distributive justice. Remember what this is. This is all about the outcome. Trying to make sure that the outcomes, the rewards that people receive, and even the punishments that they receive, that all of that is administered respectfully and fairly. Now, one of the major topics when we talk about power is this notion of positive versus negative. Personal power, this is negative. This is where you're in it all for yourself. I want to accumulate power so that I can just make people do what I want them to do. I don't actually care about what makes them happy or what might serve them or what might serve the rest of our stakeholders. I'm in it for me. Social power or socialized power, this is all other directed. It's used to try and motivate or create the conditions under which people might choose to be motivated to help the group accomplish its goals. This is the positive face and the one that I would encourage you to think most about. I think of the four things that are listed under characteristics, the most important is altruism and belief in justice. Again, staying other-directed and being fair. Your text talks about Cantor's symbols of power, and I would encourage you to carefully read this section, make sure you're familiar with it. Basically, if you go all the way down and look at the bottom of the slide, this kind of power is active and other-directed. So we're really focused on trying to do good things for other people. A person has power, according to Cantor, when they are able to intercede for someone in trouble, when they're able to get placements for favored employees, to help them get promotions, for example. When sometimes, for good reasons, they're able to exceed budget limitations. When they can get above average raises for their employees. When they're able to get items that really matter to them and their unit on the agenda at important meetings, so they get discussed and they get acted upon. When they have access to information before other people do, so they're able to perhaps prepare their department. And when top managers come to them seeking their opinion. Symbols of powerlessness, this is the flip side of being in power. You can tell a first-line supervisor, for example, is feeling pretty powerless when the way that that person acts is to micromanage, or as it says on the slide, to provide overly close supervision. Again, the word we would use, the colloquial word, is micromanaging. When they just inflexibly adhere to rules. It doesn't matter what's actually happening in the situation. The rules are the rules, they'll say. And when they also have a tendency to just jump in and do the job themselves. With staff professionals, think about folks in HR, for example, or in IT, very typically their staff in organizations. We know that they're feeling powerless and unable to influence others when they resist change, for example, or try to protect their turf. They don't want anybody else doing what they do. With top execs, we know that they're feeling powerless, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, they can feel very powerless depending on what's happening within the organization, what's happening within its environment, who's working there, etc. When they start to focus on budget cutting and basically punishing other people, they're doing that so they can remind themselves that, my goodness, I am important. Ditto with when they start using dictatorial, which is basically, I told you to do this, you will do it. Top-down communication. They're not interested in listening. They're only interested in telling you what to do. Managers in general, we know that they're feeling powerless when they make external attributions for negative events. Remember what this means. Basically, it means they blame everybody and anybody except for themselves. When things go bad, it's never their fault, it's never their responsibility, it's somebody else's. And so they make external attributions. Corda, this is actually a pretty neat little part of the chapter, so make sure you read it carefully. Corda talks about different power symbols, ways that we can tell that people believe themselves to be powerful. One has everything to do with their office furnishings. How do they arrange their desk? Where do they make you sit? Is their chair bigger than yours? Is it higher than yours? Even something as simple as whether they have a window office and where that office might be positioned. Another way that people can demonstrate to others that they see themselves as powerful is through the use of time. Basically watching their watch, looking at the clock, reminding people, you've only got a minute or two of my time. And the last one, this notion of making others stand by. So you need to be where I can reach you at any time, at any time. Political behavior in organizations, this is one of the last parts of the chapter. These are actions that aren't officially sanctioned by the organization, but they are in fact used to, meet your own personal goals. So whether it's gossiping or trying to inappropriately influence people, people do this to serve their own ends. And it's everywhere. If you're hoping that you'll be able to avoid organizational politics, well, as I'm sure you realize, you won't be able to, nor should you try to. You need to be aware of what people are doing, and you frankly need to be able to play the game better than they do, or you will get played. What encourages political activity? You want to try and figure out why people are busy politicking, why they're talking behind closed doors, why they go around trying to get people on their side before an actual meeting and so on. Well, one of the things that contributes to this is unclear goals. So when we aren't all on the same page, it's very easy for some people to try and slip in and get what they want. The second condition is autocratic decision making. When you've got people at the top who just want to pronounce and here's the way it's going to be, ladies and gentlemen, and they don't involve other folks. That encourages people to try and game the system and go around. Ambiguous lines of authority. When it's not 100% clear exactly who can say what about what. Under these conditions, you're going to see much more political behavior. Scarce resources. Under these conditions, we end up having a win-lose kind of gaming that goes on, where everyone is battling for the same slice of what might be very tiny pie. And finally, uncertainty. Wherever you've got a lack of clarity, that gives people the opportunity to step in and try to manipulate others. So some dimensions of political skill that are worth paying attention to, again, in your text. One is being socially astute. Do you know what's happening around you? Are you correctly reading situations? Are you able to tell when people are lying to you? Can you tell when people aren't really on board with what you're trying to say? This is followed by interpersonal influence. As your text says, we're talking about subtle and influential personal style that is effective in getting things done. Essentially, people who are good at this change the way they are. They're very flexible in adapting so that they can basically manipulate anybody they want to by appealing to whatever their individual interests might be. This is closely related to networking. So this ability to meet people, to connect people, to get to know different people, and to use those connections well. And then sincerity. Can you appear as though you are being authentic, truthful, interested in what other people's interests are, and so on? You really need to have each of these four skills. I would say, it's listed as political skill. I think that you need all four of these skills in order to be an effective professional. I don't think it's so much about being politic as it is this is what you do as an adult if you want to be a successful professional. Now, the rest of the chapter talks about managing political behavior in organizations, and as is true with most chapters, this is a section that I want you to read carefully, especially the piece on managing up, which is all about how do you manage your boss. Read that very, very carefully. Make sure you understand it, not only for taking a test, but also because it's just good stuff to know. Ditto with the conversation about empowerment that starts on page 183 of your text. This is also very useful for you to know. You should be familiar with what empowerment is all about and how one might do it, how one might choose to empower the people who report to you. But of the two, I would say most important is managing your boss. That's just reality. You've got to know how to do that. Enjoy reading the text as it talks about these important topics, and I'll see you in class.